Let us consider one more item of aspect of the audit evidence gathering, which is the working papers. Okay, so we've touched on it. Or you realize that we may have touched on it in other areas, but we want to touch on it in depth here in terms of the working papers. I would always repeat it that if it is not done, if it's not documented, it's not done. So make sure you document it. Now, understand the purpose of audit documentation, the nature, the content of audit documentation. We're talking of working papers. Okay. Explain the need for documentation of areas of the application of professional judgment, any advantages and disadvantages of using a standardized audit working paper. What is a permanent file? What is a current file? How to format an audit program and how the audit of smaller entities is documented differently. And then we want to understand the rules on retention of audit working papers and the auditors lien to these working papers, the right to hold these onto these working papers. All right. So, ISA 230 deals with audit documentation. The objective here is that the documentation will help us, will provide a basis of records for what we have done, sufficient basis, okay, appropriate record of the basis for our audit report. And then it also provides evidence that audit was planned and performed in accordance with the applicable ISAs, UK or Ireland, and any applicable legal or regulatory requirements. Now, we should document the nature, the extent, the timing of the procedures carried out, the results of any audit procedures and the evidence we obtained, and then any significant matters which are arising out of the audit and the decisions reached must all be documented. They are typically a permanent file and then a current file. Now, I would ask you to review pages 307 to 309 of the Mellichamp and Taylor's auditing cortex for the details on the permanent and then current file. Okay, what is the purpose of working papers? It gives evidence that we planned the audit, we designed the audit procedures. It tells us that we have a roadmap to why we are drawing this conclusion or basis or opinion. Now, to control the current year's work, a record of work done is very essential. So the working papers will help us to control this year's work, to know what was done, what should have been done, and how we mapped out any differences arising from the work. Now, a record of work done is essential to record the detailed testing we've done, any control testing, substantive testing, any analytical reviews. It also helps us to record the conclusions drawn based on the audit tests we performed. It also helps us to record the evidence we have gathered at each stage of the audit testing process. And it also helps us it enables the audit team to be accountable for its work. When you are called to account and defend your work, you've got some basis to stand on. It also assists the members of the audit team responsible for supervision to direct and supervise the audit work. So someone who is not been on the field actually could look at the working papers and see whether they did a good job in line with the standards required or higher standards required. Okay. And it helps with supervision. Let me put it that way. And controlling of the audit work. Again, purpose of the audit working papers to enable evidence to be made readily available for the final audit stages, so that when you are reviewing it, you can clearly have something to stand on, a basis to draw a conclusion that these accounts show a true and fair view and they comply with the relevant statutory requirements. Now, in exceptional situations, the auditor may have departed from the requirements of an ISA. So instead of using procedure ABC, he used a different procedure. Why? The audit working papers will give a rationale why the auditor departed from the norm and performed the audit as he had done. Now, where the auditor has, again, in some exceptional situations, performed the audit after the audit report has been signed, the papers should record a full explanation of why this has happened and details of the work performed. So remember, the fact that we signed the audit, if anything comes up, we might still have to work. So the audit working papers will give a basis why, well, we signed it, but something came up and we did extra work. Now, any experienced auditor would also rely on the working papers to conduct quality control reviews and inspection and supervision, or any external inspections by any legal or regulatory requirements. If the tax authorities they want to look at the books, they can rely on our working papers to draw some conclusions. Okay, what is the content of the working papers? We've mentioned this in class, but let me just repeat it again. The name of the client, the accounting period, the management assertions they are testing, any transaction balances or account balances they are testing, the objective of the test, the details of the work done, any sampling procedures undertaken, whether control testing was done. Remember, working papers will be used for both control testing or compliance testing and substantive testing. Okay, the outcome of the test we conducted, the conclusions we drew, the initials or the name, usually we use initial, of the person who did the test and the one who reviewed, the date the test was conducted, and the date it was reviewed. Okay. And sometimes you ask yourself, why are these necessary? If I don't put my initials there, they will not know who did this work. If I don't put the date I did the work, remember I did the work on maybe 12 September 2024. Now, what happens is that anything can happen after 12 September pertaining to the work I did. So in that case, I would say, well, as at the time I did, this was what was prevailing at the time. Okay, so everything we have there, the content has a reason why. Okay, auditors will use standardized forms and checklists to improve the efficiency of the audit, and will also incorporate schedules and analysis prepared by the business, provided these have been properly prepared. We have current year. So anything we do this year is filed on the current year, including our working papers. So we should prepare working papers that are sufficiently complete and detailed to provide an overall understanding of the audit process by an experienced auditor. Now, document in your working papers matters which are important to support your audit opinion. So any meeting records which you have reviewed with third party with the client, record them. You should also record the planning of your work, the nature of the work you did, the extent, the timing of your work, and then the conclusions you drew. You need to record all of those things in the current years, the current files. Okay. Now, we've mentioned this in terms of the content. So the working papers you have, who performed the work, who reviewed it, the date these were carried out. We should also record reasons on any significant matters which requires judgment, conclusions drawn. Again, where the auditor has information which is inconsistent with the auditor's final conclusions about a particular significant matter, we as auditors should document how we dealt with such inconsistencies in the working papers. Right, at 230, documentation. It is neither necessary nor practical for the auditor to document every matter or every judgment. We can't do everything. Otherwise, you end up writing a thesis. But all significant and material matters should be documented. So not everything, but the significant and material ones. So it is not necessary to document separately, as if in a checklist, compliance with matters for which compliance is demonstrated by documents included within the audit file. You can spool all together, you can combine all together, right, if that one helps. Now, the extent of the working papers, we could use standardized checklists to improve our efficiency, right? Currently we have computerized packages, so it's not a print copy. You do it online because we can always amend this and it makes life very easy. Systems-based auditing. Now, the extent of working paper is a matter of judgment. You want to document more, how you structure it, there will be a standard template, but how you structure it is based on matter of judgment. So a useful way of deciding what is needed is to consider which information will be necessary to help me perform my work better and to draw a conclusion. So it's a matter of judgment, okay? Professional judgment is important, yes, but in the case of significant matters that require the exercise of judgment, the working paper should contain at least, at a barest minimum, details of the matter and all information available, the management conclusion on the matter, the auditor's conclusion on the matter in a very clear and logical manner. Make sure it is transparent so that everybody who takes it will understand that, well, I use judgment, but it is clear, it is logical, it is transparent. Because your judgment could be questioned later by somebody with the benefit of a hindsight. So a lawyer, an external regulator, or a reviewer, a review partner. So make sure that you are documenting anything, even if it is based on judgment, in a logical, sequential, and transparent manner. ISA 220, quality control for audit of financial statements, set out the requirement for the engagement partner to be satisfied that sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained through a review of the audit documentation. And this has actually been discussed with the audit engagement team. Now, this does not imply that each specific working paper must include evidence of review. Okay, but of course, there must be documentations of what work was reviewed, who reviewed it, when it was reviewed, and what were the final remarks. If there are some review notes, then how he has to solve it. Okay, that's why in every organization we have quality control partners. Okay, now subsequently, working papers can be used as a basis to plan the audit for the next year. Okay, so we always need it for next year, especially if you're a continuing auditor. So clearly a starting point for a year's audit is a review of previous year's works, and we need last year's working papers to help us start this year's audit. All right, so even a slavish following of the previous year's work must be avoided and new initiatives taken. Sometimes you may want to ignore what has happened last year and start afresh. But whatever you do, you surely need to leverage on what was done last year, because you need some references. Okay. As an auditor, I own the books and papers, right? Now, the relationship between the client and the auditor should be professional. Now, all documents are the property of who? The auditor, the accountant. The only exception are the original documents, like the bank statement, the invoices. They are for the client. All right. Sometimes the auditor, the auditor actually keeps copies on his file, right? But the working papers are not for the client. I use my working paper to work and then draw conclusion. I can't give it to you. It's not yours, it's mine. If you need any justification, I can show you, okay? Where the relationship is that of a principal and agent, a relationship which will exist in situations where the accountant, say, is dealing with the HMRC. The HMRC contracted the auditor to audit company ABC, or acting on behalf of HMRC. In that case, the papers are what? The property of who? The client. The working papers are the property of the client, not the accountant. Now, if I have finished my work and the company decides not to pay me, I can keep the document. I have a lien for unpaid fees. So this is a right to retain physical possession over any books of account, files, papers, which their client have delivered to them, and also over any documents which may have come into their possession in the course of their ordinary professional work. So unless you pay me, I keep this. And in fact, even if the previous auditor has not been paid, he can decide not to release these documents to you when you go to him. Ideally, working papers must be kept at least for 5 years after signing the audit reports. All right, so we end here on working papers. Quite interesting. And once again, I will entreat you, if you will have time, to look at some of these questions for a deeper understanding of the concept and the practicalities involved in audit working papers. All right, so we end here, and I'll see you in the next session. Bye for now.